Hey there, everybody. Like I talked about last week in my introduction post, where I am doing my field placement this semester is at an eating disorder treatment facility. And how that correlates to what I'm learning in my concentration classes, I will refer to something I got to observe last week in the eating disorder treatment center. I got to observe a multifamily effectiveness therapy group, and I got to hear from 5 or 6 of the patients that are there in the residential program talk about how their family upbringing, their mom, their dad, and even step parents, their immediate caregivers, how that impacted their mental health and how it impacted ultimately their eating disorder issues. And that correlates with what I'm learning in my child welfare class and talking about not only child abuse but child neglect. And a lot of times when people think about neglect and abuse, where anyone is concerned, but most often, but specifically children, is the outward appearance of it, that they are wearing tattered clothes, or they give the appearance of being dirty, or they have scars and bruises from outward abuse. And what is more often forgotten about or not even thought about is the emotional and mental abuse and neglect that can occur from our primary caregivers, those people that are supposed to nurture us when we're young and when we're growing up. And those emotional scars become so deep that we look for other things to try and make us feel better about ourselves, or the messages that we heard perhaps were so harmful that we don't feel that we deserve to be loved or that we deserve anything good in our life. And so we turn to eating disorders or substance abuse or even alcoholism or whatever it is to try and make us feel better about ourselves. And when I got to listen to those residential patients, I got to hear their stories of their parents and how they were treated and their perception of their younger years, and whether they were nurtured or not, or whether they received the love that they needed. And I'm not saying that a bad childhood causes an eating disorder or any other kind of addiction behavior, because there is a biological and genetic component to that. But what I am saying is that it is clear from listening to these patients that they have deep emotional scars from the way that they were brought up. And some of them did have physical abuse, but most of them had, parents where they weren't very nice, or they weren't around very often, or, they just were not the loving, nurturing parents that every child needs. So this week was very interesting, and I know that it is just the beginning of everything that I am learning. But to see how it related to what I'm learning in my child welfare class was amazing. And child abuse and neglect is something not talked about as much and needs to be. So I'm hopeful that with what I'm learning in my field placement, as well as what I'm learning in my class, that once I, continue my studies and graduate from the University of Alabama, that I'm going to be able to not only help those, but also advocate for those who don't have a voice. So thanks for listening to me.